And welcome back to another week at Beyond the Trailer Park. And of course, as usual, I have the fabulous, awesome Beth over there in Pennsylvania. How the hell's it going there, Beth?
It's a going.
Well,
Typical
that's
pencil.
good.
Yeah, typical Pennsylvania. Had some interesting conversations over the last 2 weeks, so
Oh
it's
yeah.
been keeping me busy.
What
So,
kind of interesting
well,
conversation?
with all that's been going on with the whole Islam issue,
Yeah.
uh, and as I posted the other day, it's actually become kind of personal for me.
Mhm.
And it's kind of an interesting dilemma. But then I got pleasantly surprised the week before the with how some of the kids that I work with actually responded to some of the issues, and they were quite open-minded about it. So I was like, oh, okay, so it's not all bad, but yeah,
This is good.
just
This is
been,
good. Well,
but
Ashley should be making it with us anytime. She had a teenager emergency, which of course got sprung on her right like half an hour before we go live. So, that's a mom thing. We get it. No worries. But hopefully she'll be popping in anytime. So this evening, we are having our first ever show on Jehovah Witness. And both Beth and I've actually been doing some crash video watching and stuff, getting up to speed because neither one of us have quite the knowledge of Jehovah's Witness as we might of other things. So it's been very educational. But tonight, and we're going to have like equal connect representation here because I have my friend Phil over here who doesn't live too far from me. We were hanging out a couple of weeks ago. Hi, Phil. How's it going?
I can't complain.
Excellent, excellent. And then we have in our other camera, we have Shelli and her husband Steve. And I'm not sure what part of the states you're in, but they're Merkins
We're
down
in
there.
North Carolina.
Oh, one of my favorite places. I was down at Hickory for the Reason Con this
Yeah,
week.
we saw you over there down in Reason Con.
You did? Well, you should have said hi. Did you say?
I know. See how we are? Well, I didn't know you then.
That's true, and I didn't know you. So we may have actually hung out before. We just didn't remember because I was drinking a bit, just a little. Yeah. So excellent. Well, so you guys are going to help us learn a bit, and as I say, I've been absorbing some things over the last few days. There's some great YouTube channels and stuff out there that we can talk about later. But first of all, just to let everybody get an idea, um, Phil is very recently left the church, where Shelli and Steve have been out for a number of years now. So we're going to get a really good perspective here, I think. We'll get some of the older and the newer stuff. Because as we were just discussing before we went live, religions have this funny habit of changing stuff over the years and just not telling, new recruits or people who've since been born. They just kind of go, oh, don't look at that. That never happened. So lots
Yeah,
of
don't want to talk
interesting.
about it. It's awkward.
Yeah, don't talk about that. So can you, the three of you, sort of give us a little bit of an idea? Because I think everybody knows that the witnesses go door to door. Right? As I said in my blurb, I think everybody's had that, oh shit, here comes the J-dubs, kind of reaction, or Mormons, but I think you guys have been a little bit more prolific than the Mormons. But other than that, being that you're Christian, I know some denominations say you're not Christian, but other than that, can you guys give us sort of the J-dubs for dummies?
Sure, who you want to start?
Well, okay, so believe in Jesus, right?
Yes.
Yes, Jehovah's Witnesses they do qualify and count themselves as a Christian religion.
Yes.
And they actually call themselves a Christian congregation. So Jesus is very much a part of what they believe. even though they do not celebrate any Christian holidays.
Yeah, well, and we'll get to why that is in a little bit. 'Cause there's some quirks in there that some people might know about, some people might not. And now, I think I read somewhere that Jesus is a little bit different in.
I think he is Michael the Archangel.
Yeah.
That's one of the reasons why. One of the reasons why some people will kind of try to say that Jehovah's Witnesses are not Christians is because while they believe in Jesus, they don't believe in the Trinity. They don't believe that Jesus is God.
Right.
They believe that Jesus was created and is very much subordinate to God. So that's why a lot of people equate that with not believing in Jesus because, well, to them, that's what Jesus is.
Yeah, if Jesus ain't God, then you ain't a Christian. God damn it. Oh, and in case
Is that how they justify their non-Trinitarian belief then? Is because Jesus is the Archangel? Is that what you're saying, Phil?
Yeah, they do not believe that Jesus and God are the same entity as do most Trinitarian religions. They believe they're two separate entities, and they will call Jesus the Son of God. And because they have merged his personality, into Michael the Archangel, they can now say he was the firstborn of God.
He was a created being.
He was a created being. He was the first created being.
So does this mean that Mary wasn't a virgin?
They say she was.
They say she was. They say she was a conceit. You know, it was a miraculous conception, immaculate conception. That it was just that Jesus was just kind of beamed in there, I guess.
Yeah, that's a hell of a replicator, gotta say.
Yeah.
Come out of the heavens and beamed into a uterus. There you go.
That actually did happen on an episode. First, second season?
At least one episode.
Yeah, well, it happened to Troy.
Yeah. I was going to say that was the Deanna Troy episode where she got pregnant.
It was a little ball of light that kind of went up her like, whoa, now I'm pregnant. How did that happen? I don't think that's...
within a couple of hours.
Ian, yeah.
Yeah. I don't think Jesus was quite like that. So, okay, so we got Jesus, but Jesus is a little bit different. He's not really God, but he's an angel and all. But he rose from the dead, right?
Oh, definitely.
3 days.
Okay, we got all that. Good. Okay, so as far as, Christianity goes, it's pretty Christian. It's just a bit of quibbling on Trinity and whatnot. But now there's a lot of stuff that's sort of cliche about Jehovah's Witnesses that some of us sort of know but don't really know why and that sort of thing. There was one JW kid in my school when I was like, I don't know, 5th grade. No, not even. It was like 3rd grade. And I always remember, when we sang the national anthem, the poor kid had to leave. And, it was like, what do you mean? He doesn't get a birthday? What the hell? And, Christmas, what? No presents? Like, wow, that kid's got a horrible life. So, what's the deal with the no holidays? Let's go with that first.
Most of the holidays do trace back to other origins other than Christianity.
Oh, very true.
Any holiday that has an origin other than a 1st century Christian origin, they're going to view it as a pagan origin. So
okay.
The Greeks and the Romans all had their multiple gods that they worshipped, and most of the holidays that we worship today are based on those early Greek and Roman gods. So they will not worship any of those. They do not. They think if you partake in any of those celebrations, then you are guilty of idolatry. You're worshiping a god or a false god in some way other than a true creator. So that's basically the root of that.
They're accurate there, though, because they're right.
Yeah.
I mean, Christmas and Easter and all that stuff. I mean, I love it when evangelicals get after me about the Christ and Christmas. I'm like, yeah, that was a myth for us. have you read about Mithras? and
December
Yeah.
25th is pretty much Saturnalia.
yeah. Saturnalia, and when I bring out Esther, the pagan goddess that Easter's after, they get really pissed about that. And in case I didn't mention it, we are definitely not PG-13, so don't worry about censoring language if you don't care to.
You go back in the Jehovah's Witness history when avoiding holidays became a thing, they were very much attacking mainstream religion at the time. They were going around with their pickets going, religion is a snare and a racket.
I remember that.
And they were very much trying to paint all of mainstream Christianity as apostate Christianity, as having turned away from Christianity. So that was part of it, was painting all these holidays. These are actually super evil pagan holidays, and we will have nothing to do with it.
You have to keep in mind, during the 30s and 40s, the Christians were very much hated, or the witnesses were very much hated by most Christians. They were kind of the equivalent of the Westboro Baptist Church of their day, because they would go around with these sound cars with these gigantic speaker horns on them, blasting out messages that were kind of messages critical of all of the Christian churches,
Especially the Catholic Church.
especially the Catholic Church,
Yeah.
and they would just say all
No one
kinds
likes Catholics.
you know,
I mean,
so they were very much hated.
The Mormons were like the Catholics. That's the horror of Babylon. You know, it's great. You know, they might have been on to.
I was going to say with the JWs, from my experience with them, I think they're the few that I know that live in this area and is being in the truth. You know, they consider JWs as the only, like most religions, true religion.
Of course.
I've actually had some of the JW people here till I got them actually banned off my property when I had the house. Actually say that I wasn't living in the truth.
Oh, yeah. When a witness meets another witness, one of the things they'll ask each other is, "So, how long have you been the truth?"
Yeah.
Of course. And if you get to say born there, they're woo, yeah.
Well, that was graceful.
And now, what I read about the birthday thing is now, because as you said, Christmas and Easter and all that other crap isn't in the Bible, and it's not old, you know, it's a dubious origin. Now, what I read about birthdays that, well, birthdays are mentioned in the Bible, only bad people had birthday parties.
Yeah, that's the explanation. There's, what was it? King Herod's birthday and Pharaoh's birthday, and both times someone got decapitated. Therefore, birthdays are evil.
That's the reasoning?
That's the reasoning. Yep. And they also point to the scripture that says that the day of your death is better than the day of one's birth. And also they say that birthday parties are kind of showing too much respect to one person. Kind of the idolatry thing again.
Yeah.
Speaking of the Bible, is it true that you guys have your own translation?
Oh yeah, the New World Translation.
Yep. Yeah.
That's since the 50s, I think.
Yeah, when was the New World?
It's in the 50s.
50s, yeah.
It's in the 50s that they, I think.
Now,
56, I think so.
how much does that deviate from what a standard Bible, like the NIV or the King James? Is it the same, different, or?
Jehovah. I can't remember how many extra times in the Old Testament where it wasn't. It was over 200 times where it was not originally there.
Yeah.
And they also changed 1 John.
They changed the meanings of several scriptures to support their own
theological bent
of the Bible. You know, a lot of it was, you know, if you look at people who are scholars who review translations, they really, a lot of them will say that our translation is by far the worst of any of the translations.
Yeah.
Probably give King James a run for his money, but.
Well, from what I read, for most of it, the translation isn't bad, but they pick certain verses that make them uncomfortable, and they just kind of tweak them a little bit. And then, of course, there's inserting the name Jehovah all over the New Testament where it has absolutely no business being.
Now,
Yes.
there's a reason for that. Can you, why they use Jehovah? And I'm drawing a blank. Are you guys aware of that?
Well, you know,
Or can you explain it?
I think it was in it was either late 20s or early 30s, might have been 32, when they adopted the name Jehovah's Witnesses. Then that name became important to them. And before that, they were just international Bible students or Bible students. Some people call them Russellites, whatever. They did not have, you know, a trademarked name at that point until that name Jehovah's Witnesses was used. Then that name became important. So in that first translation that they made, they were going to make sure that they inserted that name as the name of God wherever they thought they could get away with it.
Yeah. I think one explanation I heard was that, like, we refer to Jesus, but we also refer to him as Christ, and like as a personal name. You know, Jesus was his personal name, and
Right.
hopefully I'm not getting this backwards. And where with Jehovah, that would be God's personal name. Did I get that right?
Correct.
Yep.
I thought that was just really bizarre.
Well, yeah, they consider one like as a title, you know, like with Jesus, you know, being the Christ, that is his title.
Right.
Christ is from Greek Christos, which means Messiah. So that's kind of a title, but Jesus was his name. They say the same thing is true of God. Then God is the title, where Jehovah is the name. The thing is that it's such a terrible. It's a mispronunciation of a bad translation.
Yeah.
You know, it was, you know,
But if
the Hebrews refer to the name as Yahweh.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah,
and it was a German guy who came up with the first translation of it, and you know, the Germans, they used the J for the Y sound, so he spelled it with a J. You know, and then the English speaking people started to say Jehovah. So it's, you know, it's a mispronunciation of a bad translation. It's not really even the real name.
Yeah.
Wow. So the Witnesses are actually pretty new. They were formed in the 19th century, yes?
Yes.
Late 19th century. I think they're slightly newer than the Mormons, because Joseph Smith was like 1820s.
Yeah, Charles Taze Russell was born in 1852, I believe, and he started questioning when he was around 13 years old, and he started to study the works of Charles Barber, who was a Millerite?
Nelson Barber.
Yeah.
Oh, Nelson Barber,
Barber,
thank you. Yeah. Oh, there goes my display driver crashing again.
Yeah. It traces back to the Millerite movement, which was around the same time that the Mormons started, I think.
Yes, that is correct. And from roughly the same area, if I understand, too.
Mormonism and Seventh-day Adventists and Jehovah's Witnesses all can trace their roots back to the Millerites.
Yep.
I don't know about Mormon.
It's sort of like evolution with a common ancestor.
Cool. Hey, I wonder if we could use that argument to support evolution.
I think we
Religious evolution, there you go.
Yeah, so, and this is why I find things like the Jehovah's Witnesses and Mormons and that so fascinating, because you could really see with photographic and documentative evidence that the evolution of even that specific faith. And there have been a lot of changes over the years. We were talking about some of them before we went live, and there's like a whole other angle of Jehovah's Witnesses that I don't think the average person would know about, and that's like that they're kind of a doomsday cult.
Pretty much. They believe that that this world is going to come to an end, and they believe that only those few people who believe as they do, who believe and listen to their message will be the ones who are saved, and that everybody else will be destroyed. And if you look at any of the old publications, and they don't even necessarily have to be that old, just the stuff that we were looking at when we were kids, I mean, it had some of these atrocious pictures in it of the end of the world and people falling into cracks as the earth would open up, and and women and children and babies all falling in there. It was just this awful imagery, that was in the literature.
There was even a couple of times when I was a kid where there were witnesses came to the door, and I was like a teenager, and I was just like, yeah, give me the damn magazine, whatever. And you look at the cover, and I'm like, the hell? I'm supposed to be like enticed by this?
Yeah, it's terrifying.
It is.
I used to find the Watchtower just absolutely fascinating. Till before I moved out of my parents' house, it was like I used to have like stacks of them. I thought it was just, it's like, wow. Although then when I finally left religion altogether, I'm like, well, now I know why, because we have the exact same shit in our stuff.
Yeah. And now what I found interesting too, and I only learned this relatively recently, was Taze Russell, I think he was the first one that actually gave dates for when the world was going to end.
Yes.
Very much like our friend Harold Camping. And he kind of suffered the same fate, unfortunately. But yeah, 1914 was the first one, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, that Adventist movement, I think they were all responsible for coming up with basic dates. The Millerites were the first ones. They came up with a date. Of course, that one failed, and they called that the Great Disappointment. But all of the offshoots, I think, of that religion have all come up with their own dates. But Charles Russell in particular, I think he had dates for several things. He had dates for when Christ's return was going to be, when the world was going to come to an end, and all these dates that he came up with were based on measurements that he said he took of the pyramids, of the Great Pyramids in Giza.
So he went himself?
I'm sorry?
Apparently he did go himself to actually measure the pyramids. Because when one of his dates didn't work out, he went back and remeasured it and found out that his measurements were off.
Oh my God.
Oh, I was just okay. Did he have a date set for 1914, and then when it didn't happen, is that the one or was that Mormons? I get them confused. So.
No, this is JWs. Mormons actually never gave a doomsday prophecy.
Okay, I get them all confused. So,
okay.
But didn't they have a major one like for 1914 and then a big stink?
Originally, 1874 was supposed to be the start of Jesus's invisible presence in heaven, and then by 1914, that was when the world was going to come to an end.
Right.
Not quite. Although, he must have got a little bit excited when war broke out, but.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, I think I read somewhere leading up to 1914, they were starting to get nervous because they're like, well, something should have started by now. And then when war broke out in the summer, it's like, okay, it's gonna happen real fast, because October is gonna be the end of the world. But then October came and went.
Yeah.
But didn't it cause kind of a big kerfluffle with some of the followers?
Oh, yeah.
It did. It did. A lot of people were. There was a lot of turmoil at that time. A lot of people saying, that he was accurate, and some people saying he was inaccurate. He changed the date for a while there to 1915. Mm-hmm. He got tripped up on the fact that there was no such thing as a year zero. When he was doing some of his chronology, that whole BC to AD switch over, there's never a zero between them. So they kind of changed it to 1915 for a while. And then they, when nothing was happening, they had to come up with something real quick. So they changed it to that Christ had returned. It was just an invisible return.
Oh.
And he actually was
Okay,
born from Barber. That's what Barber said years before when one of his predictions failed, that it was an invisible, that Christ had invisibly returned.
Yes, and then
You can't prove that.
no.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it's invisible. You just have to believe it's there. But and then it was moved to, what was it, 24?
25.
25.
1925.
Yeah.
And then he really started to have some problems when that one didn't
Well,
happen.
he died in 1916. Charles Taze Russell died in 1916. So
Okay.
after his death, Joseph Rutherford took over. And
What did you call him?
Rutherford?
Rutherford.
Rutherford.
It's like you said Rutherford.
Rusty Ford.
Yeah.
All right.
He was one of these lawyers who used to call himself judge, even though he never really was a judge. Had everybody call him a judge. But he was the one who came up with the 1925 date as the new end of the world. Of course, that kind of came and went too.
Rutherford was a bit of a character, though. He, when you say took over, he literally, when he became president of the Watchtower Society, kicked out half the board of directors because they had a problem with him making stuff up and publishing forgeries.
Oh, gee.
Would you say the debacles around this was with the end time date? Was that the cause of, like, or not the cause, or the start of the quote theology and policy changes, or was that always like that?
I think
Like we were saying.
I think Rutherford taking over was a bigger shift than the actual prophecies, because he had big plans for this religion.
Yeah, because you guys. Go ahead. I was gonna say, because like go ahead, Deb.
There's like a little bit of a delay. What I was going to say is it's interesting because of that period there was one distinct leader, but that is no longer the case. You have a governing body of, what, 7 dudes?
It's 7 right now, yeah.
Okay. Oh, so it fluctuates.
Yeah. It's not a set number. They appoint people as they please.
Okay.
Any women?
Oh, no.
No. Have any power at all.
We're there to carry the mics at the meetings.
After some of the speeches that I listened to on YouTube today, wow.
Did you hear the one about Did you hear the one about the relative sizes of our brains?
Yes, I did. I was like, damn, you guys are some pretty misogynistic assholes there.
Big time.
Yeah.
That's why I asked that question. Yeah, they are very misogynist.
An old boys club, yeah.
Yeah.
It's pretty scary in some ways. And it was well, I hadn't read, I watched. It was because I like true crime stuff, and I like some shows like 2020 sometimes do. It was like 48 Hours or one of those shows, and they were showing it was JW family, and it was like a mother and they had a young child, and the husband was beating the wife, and she goes to the elders, and they're like, well, you're just not being a good enough wife. And and at some point she even she finally said, screw the elders, I'm going to leave. And they actually leaked to the husband where she was, and he of course killed her. And the elders were just like, well, she wasn't being a good enough wife, obviously, because he wouldn't beat her if she was a good wife, and it was just unbelievable.
Yeah, and that's still going on, because I think there was a case about a year ago, almost the exact, unless it's the same case, almost the exact same scenario.
Yeah, so they don't like us women very much.
And they don't like to do anything that is outside of the organization. So if you have any kind of problem at all,
Yeah.
They like to keep it all in-house, so to speak.
Well,
I mean, if you have any kind of trouble in your life, in your marriage, anything that really should be handled by
A professional.
a professional,
Mm-hmm.
they discourage that, and they say just go talk to your congregational elders, and they'll keep it all in-house. That way, to the public sees this kind of just nothing but a happy face, you know.
Fairy tale.
A fairy tale. None of the problems are ever aired outside of the
the other side to that is they regard anyone who's not, quote, in the truth as almost demonic in a way. Like, it's like you're on the outside. We we have to have a job, but we'll tolerate you that long. But for anything that needs like real attention, we don't want those weirdo people outside the truth to get involved.
Very, very
Well,
much
That's a
versus
part of
them
it.
mentality.
Mm-hmm.
But
Yes.
a big part of it is also the way that they will explain it to members when they're trying to reason with them. I'm doing finger quotes, but you can't see because my camera's not working. Is they'll say, "Well, do you really want to bring reproach on Jehovah's name?"
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Because they're very clever with their branding, right? Jehovah's Witnesses is very tied with the name of Jehovah. So if you're making the organization look bad, they think they're literally making God look bad.
Mhm.
Like he's that weak and stuff. But
Yeah.
the video I saw yesterday, and the gentleman who was doing his own video, he had a clip from, it was a JW children's video, and it was like a little boy who was playing with an unapproved toy, and the mother was like, what happens when you like something that Jehovah doesn't like? You get sad? Like, so you're going to make Jehovah sad if you play with that toy. And it was like, wow, holy emotional blackmail back, man.
It's awful. Yeah. That was a in Sophia.
Mm-hmm. Go ahead.
Go ahead, Beth.
Oh, I was just gonna say this whole outsider issue is like, I mean, a lot of people might not be aware of is they have right now, they're dealing with a huge child sexual abuse scandal right now.
Yeah, I was going to get to that.
Okay, so I'll save my thought for then. Because I'm really good at derailing the conversations.
That's okay. We'll definitely come back to that, because that is a big thing that's going on right now, for sure.
Yeah.
But yeah, the emotional blackmail is they do it very much to the adults as well. Because I also saw a piece where it was a JW video for adults, and it was talking about how to deal with disfellowshipment, and we'll get to that too with the shunning thing. And the guy was like, it's hard if you have to shun one of your family members, but you remember that they did this. We didn't do it. That's them that did that to us, and they broke up the family.
Oh, yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. Oh, that was it was their actions that affect the family, not ours. I was like, yeah, it was in one of Pierre's videos.
Yes. Well, actually, why don't we change things up a little bit, and if you guys can just give us a brief sort of spiel about how you guys got it. Like, you guys were all born into the JWs, right? All three of you?
I was.
Yeah. My mom got called on when I was 3.
Okay, so close enough.
Close enough.
Yeah. So, well, let's start with you two. So you've been out for a number of years now, and like I've read, Shelli, you gave us a blurb a little bit about your story, but if you could just explain a little bit, because I think people get, interested, and especially if anybody who, knows a JW or is and thinking about it, it could be helpful too.
Well, when we were little kids, I don't think either of us really doubted. I mean, your parents are telling you that this is the truth, and, you look to your parents as knowing everything, and So it was what we did. We would go to the Kingdom Hall 3 times a week.
Yeah.
We'd go to all the meetings. We'd go out in what they call field service. That's when you go from door to door and proselytize. We'd go to assemblies. And so our entire social structure was the Jehovah's Witness religion. I really didn't start to have any questions until I got, I don't know, maybe 14, 15 years old, and I'd start to hear things about, like, I would kind of zone out at the meetings because, to be honest, they were terribly boring. And I'd be flipping through the Bible, and I would see all these scriptures about all these atrocities taking place, and I'm like, boy, he doesn't sound like a very nice guy, this God.
Yeah.
But they keep you so darn busy that you don't really have time to even think about it.
Mormons do that too. All kinds of busy work in Mormon land.
Yeah. And you hear like little things here and there that bother you, but like I said, it goes to the back of your mind, and you get back on the hamster wheel like a good little witness.
I don't think it was until our kids were born that we actually started to slow down enough.
Well, there was that one assembly, do you remember? And up on stage they were talking about the Mormon church, and those poor Mormons, they really think they have the truth, and it's terrible to be them because look how deluded they are. And then I got to thinking, well, how do I know that I have the truth? Maybe the same thing could be happening to me. And so after that, then we had our boys.
Yep, and the pregnancy was complicated enough where it kept us out of the loop. It kept us, she was hospitalized for
6 weeks.
6 weeks, 7 weeks.
Actually it was about 8 weeks. Yeah, for 6 weeks.
Yeah, so she was in the hospital for a long time. So we were out of the loop. And then after the kids were born, of course the kids were still in the neonatal units. We're still staying at the hospital.
Mm-hmm.
Once you are isolated for a long enough period of time, your brain actually has a chance to start thinking again.
Mm-hmm.
Will reset itself and will start to think again once it's no longer being constantly fed and bathed with the propaganda of whatever cult you're mixed up in.
The JW glasses.
Yeah. So I think that that's what started with us, and it was a very gradual. It doesn't happen overnight.
Well, what didn't help was that a group of elders came over to our house to what they call a shepherding call, because we hadn't been to the meeting in a long time, because we found out that one of our sons, Cameron, had trouble with his trachea, and so he couldn't. We couldn't take him out anywhere because even a cold could have killed him.
Oh,
so
dear.
The elders come to our house, and I was explaining my fears to this elder. I said, I'm really terrified that something's going to happen to my baby, that he could die. This elder looked me in the face, and he said, "That's okay. If Cameron dies, you'll see him again in the resurrection."
Wow. Oh.
My face just turned beet red, and I started shaking, and I just gave him a look that if looks could kill, he'd be dead now.
He would have exploded.
And I left. I stormed out of the room, went upstairs, and he come flying up the stairs after me, and I looked at him, I said, "Jehovah's organization, my ass." So that was one of the big things.
And you were telling me earlier that after that you just kind of faded out of life, and you've actually technically still in good standing.
We are just considered inactive at the moment.
Yep. Yeah. They still count us among their ranks just as inactive.
Which kind of irritates me because I really don't want to be counted among their ranks, but because of this loophole, we're still able to have contact with our family.
Yeah.
In a weird situation.
Yeah. Because, so Phil's in a bit of a different situation, and I was mentioning you're just fresh out of the fold there.
Yeah. And I left a little bit more suddenly, too.
Yes.
Because me, like most witnesses, I grew up in this religion. My dad was born in himself. And, like, how do I describe? you don't really think about these things growing up. I mean, you think about them, but you're still very trusting, right? You trust in that what your parents believe is the truth, and they wouldn't deceive you, and they obviously believe these things. And if you don't think about it too much, it all makes sense. But at the same time, I was always a very curious person. I loved math and science fiction. My dad was a big science fiction buff. He loved math and science when he was growing up. And so over the years, I would learn all kinds of things about, astrophysics and about evolution, much as I, tried not to. And so a lot of this information would just kind of accumulate over the years, so that, this year, when I finally did start to face my questions more head on, the shift happened much more suddenly. I actually think it would have happened a lot sooner if I stayed up in Northern Ontario where I was, because after high school, I didn't have a lot of Jehovah's Witness friends. I was starting to hang out more with worldly people, as outsiders are called. They were great people by all means, but they were about as far from Christian as you could possibly get. And so I still bought into the whole, these are bad associations. I shouldn't make friends with these people. These are going to have a bad influence on me. And when I moved down to the Toronto area, I made a whole bunch of wonderful Jehovah's Witness friends and stayed indoctrinated for another 5 or 6 years.
Yep. You must have thought you were in heaven at that point then.
Oh, I was having a great time. All these weird doctrinal changes were happening, and I didn't care. I was learning Russian and preaching overseas and having a blast.
Wow, that's impressive. So what sort of turned you on the path of getting the hell out of here?
Well, in hindsight, I would say when I would watch some atheist videos, one in particular that I remember watching when I was a Jehovah's Witness was, I think his name is Michael Shermer.
Oh yes.
And I watched one talk of his that wasn't about religion directly, and I found it very interesting. And I saw he had another video explaining there is no God. And I'm like, oh, well, I'll see what this guy has to say about that. He's obviously wrong. But I figured I'd watch it anyways. And I realized that some of the, while some of the arguments he made I could just dismiss for various reasons, he had other arguments that I didn't have an answer for. You know what I mean? I was like, well, it bugged me because I realized if I was debating this guy, I wouldn't have an answer to that. I would basically have to back down in defeat because his points are just better than mine.
Oh.
So that made me want to research more, because suddenly I was like, okay, well, maybe I'm still right, but obviously I don't have as much information as I thought I had. So I started wanting to dig deeper and deeper, and so when I would be doing my regular Bible study, I would try to study as deeply as I could, find out about the historical context and so on, and obviously the more I learned about the history of the Bible, the more uncomfortable it made me.
Nothing makes a devout atheist as quickly as a good study of the Bible.
I know. And you know how many people I know that became an atheist in their quest to become a better religious person?
Yes.
Yeah, there's Beth over there.
I'm a former theology major.
Wow. Her parents are theologians.
Oh, fun.
Yes.
Not necessarily theologians, but I'm as close to a preacher's kid as one can be without actually being a preacher's kid. But I went to school for Bible and theology because I wanted to go into the ministry. And I had theological differences. I was raised Lutheran. I eventually converted to the Charismatic Church, but I went to a Wesleyan Methodist college. And I couldn't understand, well, okay, we're reading the same Bible, but my theology that I grew up with says this, and the theology you're teaching me says this. I'll go to this one. It's like, so I started looking into things, one of them obviously being that I'm part of the LGBT community. I started looking into that issue, and quite early on, I was about 19, and when I realized that it wasn't even in the Bible, let alone the theology that they used to denounce it, I was like, well, I wonder what else is wrong. That was a really bad question to ask.
Dangerous
So,
question.
speaking of which, well, actually, we'll let Phil finish there. So you've just sort of taken that step a few months ago, then.
Yeah. So, like this spring, I was studying one thing in particular, and I had one question about this one bit about the Book of Daniel, and I started looking for explanations. What does this verse mean? Because it was a certain prophecy that isn't talked about that much. And I started trying to find some meaning in these verses. And when I actually went and looked at what the official explanation was, it was completely absurd. It was like the dumbest thing I'd ever read. And no wonder they don't talk about it, because nobody would ever believe it. And so that I still needed to know what this meant. I was like, if this is the word of God, right? It can't be trivial. It has to mean something, and it obviously doesn't mean that. I started looking for other explanations, and the only explanation that I found that made any sense involved the Book of Daniel being written, several centuries after it was supposed to have been written, and that explanation just made too much sense for me to ignore. So, within like a span of 2 days or so, I realized I couldn't be Jehovah's Witness anymore, and suddenly I had to question everything, because if that
That's wrong.
one part of the Bible falls apart, then the rest of it is very much open to question.
Absolutely. So how's that been for you so far?
It's been pretty good. I mean, there's some parts that are more enjoyable than others, by all means. Even when you're totally expecting it, every time somebody stops being your friend, somebody that you've considered a close friend for years, definitely not something you look forward to.
No, that's gotta suck. Has it been a lot of that yet, or are they still not quite figured out that you're pretty much out?
Oh no, very, very few of them will ever talk to me again.
Yeah. Well, and that kind of brings us to the whole disfellowship thing. Hunting. And there are a lot of faiths that do that, but the JWs are pretty hardcore about it, and it's very much, 1 minute you've got a family and a bunch of friends and all of that, and the next minute you're kind of standing there by yourself.
Yeah. And it's compounded by the fact that you're very strongly encouraged to only make friends, real friends, with other JWs. So that if you do this fellowship, you are left with no friends.
And that's twofold, because the fewer people that you associate with that are outside the truth, the less likely it is that you'll think any differently. And then, like you said, if you do happen to think any differently, they've got basically your entire social network to hold as leverage against you.
Yeah.
Yeah. So now, Shelli and Steve, you were saying you sort of slid on out of there, so you have not suffered the whole shunning thing so far. Everything's good that way.
Pretty much. My father-in-law kind of called me out on the whole thing not too long ago. Do you remember he sent us that letter?
Yeah.
He was wondering what had happened to us and why we left Jehovah, and because he knew we weren't going to the meetings anymore. And so I straight up wrote back and told him, I said, I'm an atheist now. And he still has dealings with us because we're not disfellowshipped, because of that one technicality.
Right.
He still has dealings with us because they still have hope that we'll come back.
And he still has that measure of autonomy at this point that he could make that decision on his own.
Because we have not sent them a letter of disassociation, which is what a lot of people will do if they leave of their own accord. Will send out a letter to the headquarters saying to disassociate themselves from the witnesses. We have not done that. nobody has declared us disfellowshipped in any way, so they're still allowed to talk to us.
At the moment, but that could change at any time. I mean, if they decide, you know, for whatever reason, they could stop talking to us tomorrow. It's terrifying, to be honest.
I just
And-
think that whole shunning thing is just sickening.
It is. Your volume's really low there, Beth.
Why?
I don't know.
How about now?
Another thing that got me on my way out was the 1995 thing when they changed the meaning of the generation again.
Okay, now I have no idea what the generation is, so if you guys want to clue us in on that, that would be great.
Well, go ahead, Steve.
Well, doctrinal changes, of course, have been riddled throughout the history of the organization, but you know, it all kind of focuses around that magic date of 1914. You know, Russell came up with a date of 1914. They had to justify it in some way as to what it was, because the world didn't end. They called it the return of Christ's presence, you know,
His parousia.
his parousia. So they make something up, okay. And then they say that you know, there's a scripture in Matthew that where the apostles are asking Jesus, you know, what will be the sign of your presence? You know, what will be the sign of your returning? And he gives them a few signs, and he says, you know, I tell you, the generation that sees these things occur will not pass away before the end of the world comes. And so they counted themselves as, okay, we're around, we're seeing World War I, we're here in 1914, you know, the Christ has returned to his throne. Okay, we're that generation. So that means that the end of the world is going to come in our lifetime. Well, that was 100 years ago.
We
Yes.
were always told that. When I was young, I was always told, "Oh, honey, you don't have to worry about getting old. Don't even worry about that, because Armageddon's going to come before you ever get old."
Countless generations of witnesses were discouraged from getting a higher education because
gonna say,
the end of the world was coming.
Because
You
there
know?
was a date given, what was it, 1975?
1975.
1975. Yep.
And I was seeing, like, watching video of people going, oh, I don't have to go to college and worry about getting a job because, you know, Armageddon's coming in 2 years. So, I don't have to do any of that crap.
Yep.
Well, that was just used recently down in Texas. A Christian family, they were homeschooling their kids. Well, the kids weren't learning jack shit, and the state, I think it was Texas, the state took them to court, and it was basically found it was basically because, well, you know, they believe in the Armageddon, so they didn't think the kids had to learn anything because they plan on Christ coming back before the kids are old enough to do anything.
Yeah, it's sad.
It is.
So I get, you know, and every time something like this would happen, every time there was a, you know, an upset in the congregation, one of the things that they would do, very much like an abusive spouse, they would turn around and blame the witnesses.
Blame the congregation.
They would blame the
for their
congregation for listening to them. I guess essentially, it's like, you know, they would not go as far as pointing fingers, but they would say, you know, some have misinterpreted, some have jumped ahead, some have become overzealous. You know, they use vague terms. Basically, they would blame other people, for their own missed dates and wrong doctrines, and then they would go and change stuff. So they kept changing what this term generation meant. You know, this generation that would not pass away, they kept changing the meaning of it because it was getting older, and now there's none of them left. So they've been from one definition to the next. We all know what generation means. I mean, you look at your yearbook. The kids in your high school yearbook, that's your generation. They now have a doctrine that they call an overlapping generation. It basically means if anybody is still alive who happened to know somebody who was alive in 1914, then you know, it's kind of like saying that the kids who happen to go to kindergarten at the same school that you did before you graduated are your generation. That's not your generation. We know what the term generation means, but they're kind of they're playing with semantics, and they're playing with definitions to try and basically buy more time. You know, it's a sinking ship. You know, you're going to run out of room on that point. At some point, you're going to have to just yield that point. You know.
But the funny thing when they're buying more time is they can't buy too much time because they can't have Armageddon be too far away. If witnesses start thinking that Armageddon's not going to be here for another 20 to 30 years, well, they might go out and, you know, have careers and things.
Right.
So,
you have to keep this urgency to keep them on the treadmill, to keep them going. You have to keep telling them it's just around the corner.
Yeah.
You know, it's been just around the corner for over 100 years.
That's a big-ass carrot, man.
Yeah.
And I was seeing, too, on video that they really don't like education. Well, obviously, because the more educated, the less likely you are to be non-religious. But the one guy I saw, he was saying, you know, I've always said the higher quality of the institution, the more dangerous it is.
Yeah, I think that was Tony Morris.
You know that guy there, Phil.
Yeah, that's Tight Pants Tony.
He's our favorite.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. He's kind of creepy, that guy.
He is extremely
He's
creepy.
more for a cause than any anti-witnesses are doing.
Yeah, very true.
I think Garrett Loesch also gave a talk in Italy denouncing higher education as well several years ago. If you YouTube that one, that's a real good one to listen to.
Okay, very cool. So I think we'll have a break, and I did have a segment for you guys. Just before we do that, I was just going to say our good friend Rob Robinson is watching. Hello, Rob. He's our ex-Scientologist friend, so he's, I'm guessing he was curious about the JWs because he's all against cults in general. And he just said, how about when Rutherford thought bought the mansion for all the Old Testament prophets to live in?
That's Serene.
California.
Yeah, and he was the only one that lived in it, of course.
Yeah, it was supposed to be for the prophets to return. All the faithful men of old would live there when they returned. Of course, he was the only one who ever lived in it.
With his two Cadillacs.
With his two V12 Cadillacs, yeah.
Lovely. That sounds a little bit like Olstein or those guys. So we have about 9 minutes if you guys need to go get a bio break or something. And we're going to talk about the peer review process. So if you guys could mute during that time, that'd be great too.
Behold, the atheist's nightmare. A well-made banana is just the right shape for the human mouth. It's chewy, easy to digest, and it's even curved toward the face to make the whole process so much easier.
I choose to believe that the earth is young. When we do that, when we understand that creation is the truth, then we understand where all of our doctrine comes from as well.
I just want to let you know that there actually is a book out there that actually tells us where matter came from. Bill, I do want to say that there is a book out there.
Next time you hear on television somebody say millions of years ago, what's the question we're going to ask them? Were you there? Were you there? Call them up on the telephone and say, excuse me, Mr. TV man, were you there? Only way we could know what happened in the past if someone was there to tell us. That's right, dinosaurs lived beside people. And of course you'll have an evolutionist who'll say, that's not right, dinosaurs lived millions of years ago. What do you ask them? Were you there?
Welcome to Creation Moments, a little slice of creation silliness that I get in my email every day, and I'd like to share it with you so that we can all get a taste of just how crazy creation shit is.
On this week's Creation Moment, Taylor's going to tell us how screwed up the peer review process is.
It is common for evolutionists to dismiss a lot of great work by creationists, saying that their papers do not appear in their own peer-reviewed journals. But now, editors of two of the most prestigious peer-reviewed medical journals have gone on record as saying that the peer review process doesn't mean much anymore. Several years ago, Dr. Marcia Angel, a physician and longtime editor of one of the most trusted medical journals in the world, wrote this: "It is simply no longer possible to believe much of the clinical research that is published, or to rely on the judgment of trusted physicians or authoritative medical guidelines. I take no pleasure in this conclusion, which I reached slowly and reluctantly over 2 decades as an editor of the New England Journal of Medicine." More recently, Dr. Richard Horton, editor of The Lancet, wrote the following in his own magazine: "The case against science is straightforward. Much of the scientific literature, perhaps half, may simply be untrue," unquote. He also said something we've been saying for years. In their quest for telling a compelling story, scientists too often sculpt data to fit their preferred theory of the world. So never let an evolutionist throw the peer review process in your face as a mark of the superiority of evolution over biblical creation. Unlike the peer-reviewed publications, the Bible is never wrong.
Wow, Taylor is grasping at enough straws here to build a life-size straw man. First of all, there's a good reason why creationists don't make it into peer-reviewed journals with works about creation. That's because creationism has nothing to do with actual science. And unfortunately for them, neither does intelligent design, as the Kitzmiller versus Dover trial proved to anyone who might have tried that avenue. Data produced from the presupposed position that there is a creator is already compromised. You cannot start with a conclusion and hope to find a theory and then hope to be taken seriously. A good portion of the time, when creationists start whining about other scientists skewing the data, it's a whole lot of projection. They either twist things to fit their desired conclusion or just ignore the parts they don't like. Kind of like Bible study. Cases in point. During the Dover trial, it was pointed out that Behe stated in his book that on the subject of molecular evolution, the advocates of the natural mechanism, the Darwinian mechanism, must publish or perish. Meaning, they had better produce some publications on the subject or give up on the idea of evolution. Yet, when he was presented with over 50 books and articles on just that subject, some of them older than even his book, he was forced to admit that he either hadn't read them or didn't even know they existed. Another example is Peter Sparrow, the creationist I heard speak last year. He bragged to the audience about how he basically forced his university to give him a science degree, even though he refused to acknowledge the validity of the science he was being taught. He just kept taking courses and failing until they got sick of him and gave him a Bachelor of Science. Luckily for us, they also blackballed him in academia, forcing him to settle for the one ill-gotten degree. But let's look at these seemingly inside critics of the peer review process. Both were editors of very prestigious scientific journals who are complaining about the quality of the literature being put forward. Now, I should mention that not all science journals are equal. Some, such as the ones edited by Horton and Engel, have very good reputations and are most referenced by other scientists. They would have the best and brightest people doing the reviewing, and people will be more likely to trust the pronouncements from those publications. Other journals do not have the same quality of people and process behind them and might publish articles that others have passed on. Some even require people to pay them in order to have their submissions published. Those in particular should be regarded very warily. Now, both editors' statements are rather general and do not mention any particular publications. So we don't know if they're talking about all publications or their own or others that are less prestigious. My first thought, however, was that if they are the editors, are they not partially responsible for the inferior content? Why are they allowing shit to be published in their own journals? Few people would have the ability to affect change in that situation the way they would. But now the implication Taylor is making here is that the peer review process is fatally flawed and unreliable, and he's basing that on the comments of 2 people. Among the thousands of scientists that contribute to and review for the reams of publications out there, Taylor has decided that the opinions of 2 are more valuable than anyone else's. It's also one of my biggest pet peeve comparisons. That science, because it changes, is not trustworthy, and the Bible is trustworthy because it never changes, and as he says, is never wrong. What utter bullshit. Science is supposed to change. That's the whole point. To make hypotheses, test those ideas, and correct our understanding of things as we learn more. Sure, science can be wrong. It's wrong all the time. And the peer review process helps scientists to correct themselves. Is that process infallible? Hell no. I found a recent article discussing the problem of some scientists who are actually screwing around with the peer review process. Biomed Central, a journal out of the UK, is retracting over 40 articles it published due to fabricated peer reviews. Does this prove Taylor right? No. There are unethical people in any profession. Just listen to my friend Matthew the Apostle's show, In the Name of God, the podcast, and you'll learn just how immoral the religious can be. So, obviously, there are immoral and unethical scientists out there. The thing is, science can't be faked. It doesn't matter if the peer review articles were fabricated. Eventually, it will become obvious that the science put forward in those articles is bad, and then the fabrication will become evident, which is exactly what happened. Of course, the ideal is to reject bad science before it gains any type of acceptance, but as we know, no system is perfect, and that definitely includes the Bible. Never wrong my ass. We don't have a firmament around the earth. Rabbits don't chew their cud. You can't have a day without the sun. Snakes and donkeys don't talk, and neither do flaming bushes for that matter. People don't come back from the dead, and no one has ever seen a zombie outside of Hollywood. Taylor is on crack. Biblical crack. Anyway, enough with that insanity for now. Join us again for another creation moment. Hey, there we go. You guys can unmute there if you like. Well, not just
Excellent.
if you like. Glad you like that. That guy Taylor's really screwed up.
Well, what he relies on, and this is very, very prevalent in the anti-vax movement, is you'll have a graph and you'll have plots of all your points, and there'll be a general trend, which will be the main line, so to speak, of your data, and then you'll have one study that's an outlier, and that's the one they focus on.
Oh, yeah.
Because one study out of thousands, let's say, supports their bias, and that's the study they'll focus on, and that's the only study that's correct.
And I love it because they'll be like, see, this is the only one that has the courage to tell the truth. It's like, no.
Exactly.
That's wrong.
And you'll find that I'm working on a piece right now about the favorite fluoride Nazi myth, that the fluoride was used in Nazi Germany to lull the prisoners. Well, it's easily debunked in one statement. What the hell did they drink?
Yeah.
Because by the end of the war, they barely had water running to the ghettos in Germany and Poland, let alone water in the concentration camps. So what did the Nazis drink?
Let's be honest, nobody had time to worry about them being docile in the concentration camp.
Yeah, but
it got off the train and they were toast.
Yeah, but it's like, I mean, so that relying on the outlier is very prevalent within the con nutter sphere. But the whole thing about the peer review process, I find so redundant, is that one of the I'll say most infamous of studies, not Wakefield, Mark Regnerus, his work is primarily used in court cases trying to fight against same-sex marriage, child adoption by same-sex parents, etc. And it ties into the journals. Most of the journals are the bad journals are what are called paid to peer review. Well, it turned out that not only did Mark Regnerus submit his paper to a paid peer review, the peer reviewer that was paid actually he reviewed one of his articles.
Oh, so I'll review yours if you'll review mine.
Review mine, yes. And basically, if you follow anything with Mark Regeneris's work, it's basically been debunked. Basically, he collected a bunch of people who were allegedly raised by same-sex parents. Well, most of the people, quote, interviewed, the parents were, it turned out, they weren't raised in a same-sex relationship. Most of them were divorced after, 16, 17 years. His study was so flawed, but yeah, they still quote it, just like they do with Wakefield. So yeah, those are...
Yeah. So yeah, you guys be familiar with it, but it's a company. I don't know if it's a company or just a group, but they put out these creation moments, and my friend Foda signed me up for their mail list, so I actually get one of these in my email like every weekday, and it's all stupid shit. Like, and these speeches that he was talking about, they said, peer review process is no good. Those are from like 7-8 years ago. Like he doesn't normally pick up on, recent information. I think, he's used data far back from, the turn of the last century and shit. It's ridiculous. But
well, in his defense, there is still, I'll use this term loosely, controversy concerning the peer review process, but not specifically him. Well, Lamar Smith, it's going on right now. They're trying to question the process, but what the people don't get about the peer review process, which you pointed out, is it's gonna get caught. If you're fudging your data, you're gonna get busted. But for some reason, the whole anti-science denialism that we're experiencing, especially with climate change, Lamar Smith, who is head of one of the science committees, basically wrote. He's chairman of the House Science, Space, and Technology Committee, and he doesn't think global warming is real. He thinks it's a huge conspiracy by, the scientists and who fudged their data. Now, this is somebody in our government to make it look like the planet is heating up because, of course, President Obama. And Phil Plait did a really, he's up to 4 parts, a really nice takedown, and basically they're saying that a paper published in Science magazine, which is highly reputable, is showing that global warming pause by the denier actually exists, or didn't in fact actually exist. One of their claims is, we're not getting warmer based on weather, not climate. And he actually saying that, the paper was rushed into publication and I have whistleblowers. So yeah, this is still an ongoing, it seems to be their new talking point to combat having to make changes.
It always makes me laugh, though, because I say this to creationists all the time. I'm like, look, yes, I think evolution is the correct theory. That's pretty much a done deal. But that's not why I'm an atheist. Like, even if you were to prove to me this second that evolution never happened and it's all wrong and all that, I'll be like, okay, so tell me when you find out what it was. I'm still an atheist.
I actually know an atheist who is not a believer in evolution.
Really?
I don't know how the hell he justifies it, because I don't want to go down that rabbit hole. But yeah, there are, not many, but there are a few. I don't think he leans on creationism per se. But yeah, there's a few outliers out there. But yeah, they focus in on one specific thing, and that becomes their major talking point. But it's like I've said before, if they lose creationism, point blank, which they basically have, what they do is they lose the whole underpinnings and the purpose of the Bible, the purpose of Christ's mission. It totally it ruins their claim to superiority and authority over man. You get rid of creationism, it destroys the whole Bible.
That's why they get so pissy when they're like, I did not come from no damn monkey. Like, you're not that special, Buttercup. Trust me.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh well.
Yeah.
Well, wait. That was for this week. I'll see what I end up in my mailbox for next time. I hate going into that folder because I'm like, what the fuck?
I have like 4 segments started, but I don't have any of them finished because I keep ending up down rabbit holes.
Well, hurry it up, because...
Yeah, it's, some of the right-wing stuff that's come out, it's just, it's so asinine. It's like, seriously?
I know.
So, yeah, I can understand that coming from, trying to put one together. It's like...
So let's get into, I think, the 2 biggest things that crop up with Jehovah's Witnesses all the time now. It's the first, number 1 is the blood thing, and then now just recently, well, recent years, we've had the sex abuse scandal, which is almost as much in the news as the Catholics. They're not quite there yet, but which hopefully I hope they never get there. But let's start with the whole blood thing, because I think that confuses a lot of people, because it's very specific parts in the Bible where they interpret to say that. What's that one?
Well, the blood is not the first health issue the society focused on.
Oh, good.
They focused on the blood starting in 45, but before that it was vaccinations. You were not allowed to get vaccinations, and you were not allowed to get organ transplants.
Oh.
Although both of those 2 things they've reversed their position on. So there have been people, throughout the years who suffered at that policy, at that doctrine, who've had that doctrine now reversed, from underneath them, who suffered on it needlessly, and we're left with this one issue now, the blood issue, which witnesses have, since 1945, have not been able to get blood transfusions. Their reason for that is kind of flawed.
Say the least.
Well, one of the main scriptures, one of them is Leviticus 17:14, where it says, "You must not eat the blood of any sort of flesh, because the soul of every sort of flesh is in its blood." So they say that because blood is precious to Jehovah, you shouldn't take it into your body because it's the symbol of life.
It's a symbol. They look at blood as almost like a holy sacrament. It's something that is to be used. Jesus spilled out his blood, so it's a symbol of his atoning for sins. The Jewish people used to have to sacrifice animals on an altar, as an atonement for sin. So it was, blood is this symbol of life, which is supposed to be holy.
Yes.
Unfortunately, this extreme viewpoint is not held by any other religion. Even the Jewish people themselves do not have this viewpoint.
It's funny the way you describe the interpretation. It sounds an awful lot like early vampire legends. Like it does. As an expert.
Well, the funny thing I find with it is that the Bible says eat. You're not eating the blood. You're being transfused. Transfused with it. And I don't know if you're familiar with the Dennis Lindbergh case.
No.
He was a 14-year-old boy from Washington State. Yeah, Washington State. And he was diagnosed with leukemia. Now, in Washington, at 14, a child can make his or her own medical decisions. It's the same law that allows a 14-year-old to go get an abortion without parental consent. Well, his biologicals were messed up. They were not Jehovah Witnesses, but his aunt who took him in was. And basically he was, I'll say adopted, he was actually adopted, at 13 and dead by 14 because he refused a blood transfusion. And his aunt / mother stood by him. And basically, there's a really nice story that was published just a couple weeks ago that I posted on my blog. And one of the lines that hit me in the story is, parents may be free to become martyrs themselves, but it does not follow that they are free in identical circumstances to make martyrs of their children. Mm-hmm. And, you know, I mean, the kid, he wasn't even in the church for a year, and already, you know, it's just the indoctrination, and I mean, it's bizarre. I mean,
at that age, I would have done the same exact thing.
Yeah, because they made accepting a blood transfusion a disfellowshipping offense.
Yes.
To willingly accept a blood transfusion, they would no longer have any contact with you. Now, I imagine for a 12, 13, 14-year-old kid, losing contact with all family and friends, that's the same as losing your life. I mean, that is your life when you're that young.
Well, for me, I don't think it would have been the fear of disfellowshipping. It would just been fear of making Jehovah angry, I think is what it was. That's what we were told from the time we were little, you know. This is what you do. You don't take blood because Jehovah won't like that. You'll die at Armageddon.
Yeah, it was made into like this big loyalty test. You know, because you know ahead of time that if you're put in that situation and the doctor tells you need a blood transfusion, that's you being put to the test, and you have to either stand up for Jehovah or give in to the pressure and turn on Jehovah. They make it into a very black and white, you're either for God or against him kind of moment.
Exactly. Yep.
Yeah. Well, I just find it bizarre because he wasn't even raised in the faith. I mean, I could more understand for you, well, all three of you, because pretty much you were 3, you know, so you literally. But here, you know, a 13-year-old kid making a decision, and they had asked his aunt after this all transpired. I think it was in the recent article, but they had asked him, his teacher had asked Dennis, you know, and he said, but more people think I should follow my faith. Wow. So it wasn't even, and then the aunt said that now that the years are passing, I feel like everybody has forgotten the courageous stand he took. Intellectually, I know that is not true, but somehow I want his name written down somewhere in our literature. I want him remembered. It is as though life goes by and he never existed, not for me, but to others. I mean, it's like they don't even. It's like she has no freaking clue what he and her basically decided.
No, and the sad thing is if they ever changed their viewpoint on this, which they very well could. They change their viewpoints on things all the time. If they changed their stance on this, his whole sacrifice would have been for nothing.
Yeah.
All of that. I'm sure there have been thousands of people over the years that have died because of that. And then it's like, oh, just, Jehovah changed his mind. Too bad, so sad. Like, unbelievable.
That's why, like, when... go ahead.
I was just going to say the one video that I saw, they showed a cover. I can't remember if it was Watchtower or Wake, and the cover had the pictures of like 27 children who had, quote, given their lives in support of Jehovah. Like, it's just disgusting.
I believe that was an Awake magazine.
Awake.
Yeah.
I'd have to go back and look at it, but usually they don't like to talk about the ones who died. They like to talk about the ones who got leukemia, refused the blood transfusion, and miraculously survived.
Of course, because Jehovah healed them and all.
Yeah, like it happened. Actually, a friend of mine got diagnosed with leukemia and somehow survived, and I'm glad he did. But it could have gone way worse, and I know that there's a lot of cases where it does go a lot worse, and people just don't like to talk about it.
Yeah.
Well, that's why it struck me, Shelli, when you sent your little bio blurb, with going through what you went through with your son. I can so understand it, but it's like, I'm glad that was kind of the tipping point for you.
Yeah, and we went through a really scary period there where we thought that Cameron was going to have open heart surgery, which would have very well could have been a death sentence to perform without a transfusion.
Yeah.
His trachea.
Well,
the way they fix it is they have to put you on the bypass machine and they have to go in and repair the trachea. So yeah, that was a really hard time.
Oh, I bet.
Well, one point I do want to make, in case we have any Jehovah Witnesses listening, is they're actually, because of this blood doctrine, there was an article I posted back in September, basically how Jehovah Witnesses are basically changing medicine. And what's been occurring is that, I'm going to read from what I wrote, that science has advanced enough to now accommodate the bizarre beliefs and restrictions. They've come up, it's putting doctors in really bad places, and they've actually come up with a new technology to deal with this issue. I'm trying to find exactly what it's called. They said, surprisingly, doctors' experience in these programs has also led them to order blood far less frequency. It's a bloodless surgery.
There's no doubt that that blood can be overused, in instances when it doesn't have to be. So it is a good thing that they are developing techniques that they can do surgeries and things without using the blood.
Or there are circumstances where they just don't have it in stock to use. Maybe in a war zone or something like that. They just not use it. I'm curious though, because I've heard of people stockpiling their own blood. Would that be allowed?
No. Once it leaves the body, you're not allowed to put it back in. You're supposed to spill it out on the ground.
Wow.
They actually made that explicit. That was like one of their bullet points in one of the big articles detailing how their doctrine works. It was like, can we store our blood? No, you may not. Can we use bypass? Yes, you may.
What's very interesting is that from 1945 to 1983, there was a complete ban on all blood products. You couldn't use any blood whatsoever. But then from 82 to 2000, they started to allow blood fractions in. And so after that, then hemophiliacs could take their treatments that they needed, because up until that point, hemophiliacs were dying that were Jehovah's Witnesses. What else? RH negative babies and mothers, they would die because that is a treatment made out of blood fractions.
Really? Oh, I didn't know that.
Mhm. Yep.
Wow.
So they allow blood fractions in, and the funny thing is, if you look at the fractions and add up the fractions that are allowed, it's most of the blood except for the water.
Yeah. It's actually taken from, goodness knows how many pints of blood that has actually been donated.
Wow.
Yeah.
So it's a severe lack of any scientific knowledge at all, obviously. Wow. So before we get into the other stuff, because we're talking about, people who may die in contravention of some of these things too. So you mentioned, if you do something that goes against doctrine, you quote, die in the Armageddon. So that brings me back to, they don't really have hell, do they?
No, they don't believe in hell.
Mm-mm.
They have a lot of symbols that sound like hell, like you'll hear them refer to the lake of fire. which is
Sheol.
And Sheol. They're just basically referring to everlasting death.
Right.
Not so much a torment, just a death without any hope of any resurrection.
Okay.
It's as if you were never born to begin with.
Yeah.
I'm okay with that. Really am.
But yeah, it's funny because they will use thought experiments to help people reason why loving God wouldn't have any things set up like hell. They would say any loving parent, no matter how bad their child was, would never take his hand and hold it over a stove, and burn him, as a method of punishment. In fact, if any parent were to do that, they would haul them away to jail. But they stop there. They don't proceed to the next logical point. Is if you believe that your God would allow your children to die because you don't want them to take blood, or if you believe in a God who would allow any children to die anywhere on the world, then you're already morally superior than this God. It's like they will only allow their thought process to go so far.
Like a loving parent isn't going to dump their child on the street corner and say, "Have a nice life, bye."
Yeah, a loving parent is not going to disfellowship their children and say, "We're never talking to you again because you don't believe the same thing we do."
Yep, exactly. But at least they don't believe in torturing you in fire forever and ever. That's a small mercy, I guess.
Yeah. So when you think about it, like, if they're right, my fate is more or less the same as if I'm right, namely that when I die, I stay dead.
Yes.
The difference is that if they're right, my death is going to be pretty soon. It's going to be very violent, and they're all going to be dancing on my grave afterwards.
That's okay. Yeah, if I thought I was going to get blown up in Armageddon, there's things I could do to preempt that.
What's really funny about the witness doctrine is you could have like this terrible, horrible person, a mass murderer, and he could die right before Armageddon happened, but then after Armageddon he would be resurrected. Then you could have an atheist who is a really good person, but just doesn't believe in God, and he will die Armageddon, but will die forever.
Yeah, that's pretty sad.
Yeah.
That's a complaint I have about a number of Christian-based faiths, Abrahamic faiths. Yes. So then the other thing that, before we get into the whole sex abuse scandal, Bill, when we had talked last, because we got a little sidetracked off the disfellowship thing, you were sort of looking for a loophole, I think, and a couple of things. You think you had maybe got the call for a meeting, but you hadn't actually taken the call.
Yeah. Well, the thing is, I'm like, sorry, what are your names again? Shelli and Steve. Yeah. I remembered. So yeah, right now I'm technically inactive. No one is technically required to shun me. Most do anyways. Generally, family members will kind of embrace that loophole and still talk to you because they're allowed to. But I haven't exactly been quiet about it. Whenever I do talk to some of my old friends, I make no effort whatsoever to hide the fact that I'm an atheist. I'm very open with it. And I think it started to make the elders a little bit uncomfortable. So they've been trying to call me to set up a meeting because, they have a whole procedure they have to follow if they're going to officially disfellowship someone or excommunicate, depending which terminology you want to use. I haven't gotten back to them yet. I've been meaning to, but I've been busy. But I don't know. I'm kind of thinking about going and having a little chat with them about disfellowshipping and how they justify it and how they justify having these secret judicial meetings, just to see how they could defend it when actually asked to justify these practices they have.
Yeah.
What's funny is they reversed their position on that whole disfellowship thing because they used to preach against disfellowshipping or excommunication up until 1947.
Mm-hmm.
And then in 1947, they used to have article after article how that was not the right thing to do.
It was actually, they said it was pagan.
It was a pagan thing to do.
Yeah.
Wow.
And they then flipped over on that decision. They completely reversed themselves. And now, you know, and it's funny, it's the reasons they were giving for why it was wrong are exactly the same reasons they do it now.
Yeah. In the article from 1947, they list like the reasons why some churches do excommunicate, and then they refute all of those reasons. And then less than a decade later, they embrace all of those reasons that they just refuted.
Yeah, if you want to Google it, it's called "Are You Also Excommunicated?"
Yeah.
It's from January 8th, 1947.
You should take a copy of that with you if you go.
I might do. Because so far I've seen 2 of these judicial committee meetings being recorded by a secret camera.
I was gonna say I've seen one of those so far.
Yeah. So the first one that I saw, which was done a number of years ago, was a guy. He runs a website called JW Struggle, and he's still a Christian himself, but he's a much more moderate, reasonable Christian than some other ex-JW Christians are. And he goes into this meeting basically trying to explain to them very mildly his reasons why he objects to certain things about the organization, and of course they say, okay, that's nice, and they excommunicate him. And then the one that was done more recently, the guy was an atheist, and he again was explaining his reasons and the problems that he had, not just with Joseph's religion, but also got into the problems he had with God as he is described in the Bible and so on.
Mm-hmm.
What I would like to do, whenever I get around to calling the elders back, is just go in and ask them about the process itself. It's like, okay, I'm being invited to this meeting. Before we start, could you explain to me why you hold these meetings in secret, which is basically a heresy trial? Why are these trials being held in secret? Can you justify that from the Bible? Like, you think you can justify everything? And secondly, why is the usual punishment shunning? How is that justified by the Bible? And if I do a little bit of research, I can probably tell ahead of time what their answers are going to be, and I'm going to have some further follow-up questions, and just to see what they end up doing when their backs are against the wall. If they just stick to the rules and just fellowship me anyways, even though they can't explain it, or if things take a more interesting turn. And then if I do get disfellowshipped, I'm going to appeal, because they have a ridiculous appeals process, and I want to drag it out and make them uncomfortable.
And you were saying that your family lives in Northern Ontario, and so if they don't make a point of announcing your disfellowshipment in their congregation, then they can claim plausible deniability and still talk to you.
It's always possible that my parents would never even hear about it.
Yeah.
And they're not going to ask, so it could stay that way for a while.
Good. Well, I hope it does, for sure.
And none of my friends around here will talk to me anyways, because they're not immediate family, so they have no need to maintain ties.
And you're an evil apostate, so
Yep. And loving
it. You're worldly and pollution.
Yeah.
And speaking of pollution, the big thing recently that's been in the news is, of course, the sex abuse scandal. And so now a lot of people might say, well, it happens in all kinds of clergy. Yes, it does. But the thing with the Jehovah's Witnesses is the hierarchical structure and the procedural structure that almost precludes any abuse ever being reported. So, if you guys want to talk about how that works.
Let me read a quote from an article talking about this. This is what this article found. According to Watchtower policy, When an elder receives a report of child abuse by a member of the congregation, he is not to take action against the accused unless there are 2 witnesses to the crime. That policy comes from Deuteronomy 19:15. No single witness should rise up against a man respecting any errors of any sin. And it goes on. At the mouth of 2 witnesses or at the mouth of 3 witnesses, the matter should stand good.
Yeah.
So basically, you diddle a child, you got to do it in front of 2 other people.
I was going to say, pedophiles do that just, right in front of people.
That's right.
But as you were saying earlier, also there's the expectation that any issue that you might have is to be dealt with in the church.
Yeah, it was to be kept internally. That way, nobody outside would be seeing that there was any problem going on inside the congregation. It would not detract from the name of Jehovah, would not detract from the name of the organization. So everything was kind of kept quiet up until fairly recently. I think mostly due to the fact that it's readily available now on the internet where people can start to discover what's going on themselves. The biggest thing, I think the biggest boon to this whole thing has been this summer in Australia. The Royal Commission had open trials where they investigated this, and the people who were on trial were these elders, and these different people who made these policies were brought before judges and asked to explain themselves as to why these policies were put into place and why they did not report these as crimes to the police like they should. And up until now, anytime anybody has been speaking against the witnesses, it's easy to tell somebody, don't listen to that person. They're no longer, they're just fellowshipped, or they're apostate. You don't have to listen. These are the elders themselves. These are the governing body members who are on trial now in Australia, and it was all on the internet. It was all broadcast live. It was all out in the open. It's there for everybody to see, and in many cases, their own words are their own worst enemies.
If you get a chance to look at any of the Australian Royal Commission, you should definitely do so. It's very enlightening.
And just so people realize, this is 1,000 cases that they are investigating. 1,000.
Not one of those was reported to the police.
Right. Yeah.
And the thing is, if anybody who looks into pedophilia and how all that works, these guys don't just abuse one child. They average. The estimate last time I studied it was every abuser has usually abused upwards of 30 to 40 children by the time they get caught.
Yes.
So with the witnesses, what the ridiculous part is that this person will abuse a child, and he might be disciplined within the congregation, but after a little while they'll reinstate him and he'll be put in a position of power again. Very much like the Catholic Church.
Yes. In fact, there was one of the videos I watched, because the young lady who actually took the church to court, Candace Conti. It was an interview with her, and they brought up, I think it was from a manual or something, where it even says that a brother who's been accused of sexual abuse, there's nothing that says that he can't participate in the church and the church activities and whatnot.
Exactly. Yep.
Unbelievable.
The magnitude of the problem.
Go ahead, Phil.
I was going to say that when I learned about the magnitude of this child abuse problem this year, it came as a huge shock to me, because within the congregation, it's not only a matter of keeping it secret from outsiders, but they also keep it secret within the congregation too.
Yes.
Anyone talking about a sexual abuse that occurred is viewed to some degree as slander. You don't talk about it, you don't want to discourage the rest of the congregation. So the majority of Jehovah's Witnesses are completely oblivious to this, unless they've had the misfortune of being personally involved in one, in a case like that.
Because if you start talking about it, then people, especially parents, are going to start questioning the what the intelligence of those in power that are making these decisions, I would imagine.
Yeah.
And, and if this if Jehovah's people are screwing up that bad, what does it say about Jehovah?
So if you're raising questions like that, then that makes you into a troublemaker, and you don't want to be a troublemaker.
Oh no.
Well, part of the I was going to say part of the secrecy issue comes down to there's a case that's, I don't know if it's resolved yet or not, but it was in Delaware, and basically the lawyer for the congregation was trying to argue that the elders of the Jehovah Witnesses are protected from reporting requirements by clergy privilege. So that's why they're, so if people within the congregation know what's going on, it can get reported, but that's what they're trying to argue, that it's a First Amendment case, or a First Amendment issue. And one of the things I found when I was looking into this is that they're challenging the constitutionality of Delaware's child abuse reporting mandate. And they're trying to walk around it. They're trying to say that the law is unconstitutional and it violates, clergy congregation privacy issues. And that's how they're trying to get around it. By keeping it secret, they don't have to report it.
The thing about that defense, though, is that this isn't information that's coming out of some kind of a confessional. They don't have... and these are people, reporting other people's crimes, reporting things that were done to them. Why are they simply obligated to keep that a secret?
Yeah, because this is like a parent or a young person going to an elder and saying, hey, brother so-and-so touched my kid or touched me. And, yeah, it's not like brother so-and-so went to the elder and said, oh, I'm a terrible person, I touched this kid.
Right.
Yeah. Well, what it came down to in this case, I'm just going to read, it says, Eric Bondenweiser, a former political candidate charged with abusing a young boy in the 80s, asked the judge to rule his pastor could not give prosecution testimony because the conversation he had and the pastor was sacramental confession under the law. And argued the law was unconstitutional if it was read to allow Catholic confessions, but not faith leader congregant talks and other faiths to be privileged. And actually, the case ended up in a mistrial because the judge himself basically said, that's not the interpretation I get. I mean, they're just throwing spaghetti on the wall to sidetrack this issue.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So that was the big case that I had heard about, was the Candace Conti case, and then now you're saying the in Australia, that's a hell of a bombshell, I can imagine. Phil, was there a lot of rumblings about that before you left, or was it just all swept under the rug?
Well, I didn't hear much about it at all before I left, and I left this spring, so that was before the Australia Royal Commission all started. But the Candace Conti case, I think that was 2012, and I knew nothing about it. When some elders came to my door shortly after I left, I mentioned to one of them, I was like, have you ever heard of Candace Conti? He says, no, I don't know who that is. I'm like, oh, well, I explained to him who Candace Conti was, as an example of some of the disturbing things that I'd learned since I left. Most of them are completely oblivious to it because it's not something that they'll want to talk about. It's not something they'll want to read about, so it stays outside of their bubble.
Yeah.
I tried a little bit to subtly draw attention to the Australia thing because I still had some JWs following me on social media. So when they, on the last day of the commission, when they actually had a member of the governing body was summoned to give testimony before the commission, I just made a little post on my social media account saying, oh, this governing body member is going to be giving testimony and you can watch live at this website. I'm just not good at that.
That's good. That's definitely good.
And several people followed me when I posted that.
But yeah, they're getting hit right and left with cases now. And Candace Conti did win her case. Now the punitive damages were lowered quite significantly, but it was still a huge hit for the Watchtower. Then there was the Gonzalo Campos case in 2014, and the judge ruled in his favor as well for $13.5 million.
Oh,
I was just going to bring that one up because I just pulled it up off my blog. I know I had written about it. I was trying to find it.
And there was 5 other people that they settled out of court as well in 2012 for an undisclosed amount of money, and goodness only knows how much that was.
So now, do the witnesses tithe like a percentage, or how do they get money out of them? No.
No percentage, just guilt trips.
What's that, Phil?
I say no percentages, just guilt trips.
Yeah.
Guilt trips, exactly.
Yep.
They
guilt people into giving.
They really pride themselves on not asking for money. There's a quote that they like to repeat from Charles Russell from the early 1900s, where he's saying that because he was publishing the Watchtower magazine, and he's saying that we believe that the Watchtower magazine has Jehovah as its backer, and the day that we have to ask for money is the day that we know that we'll have to suspend the publication, because that'll be the sign, basically, that Jehovah's no longer backing this publication.
Oh, good. So it could go away soon.
So now that they're
one of the recent videos, they were out asking for money.
But they're doing it in kind of a way that they're trying to deny that they're asking for money while they're asking for the money.
And it's funny because they have announced that they're suspending all publications in India.
Yes.
Oh, well, that's good.
And they also announced that a lot of their building projects are being delayed, postponed, or just altogether done away with.
Well, that's what happens when you have to give out all your money to victims of abuse.
Yeah.
But they're still trying to ask for money in more subtle ways. Like, I don't know if you saw, there was a video they did recently, one of these Caleb and Sophia videos, where the girl's got a little bit of money, and she's thinking about going and buying some ice cream with it.
Yeah,
then she thinks about all the Kingdom Halls and magazines they can print with that money. And she goes and puts that money in the contribution box instead of buying an ice cream.
Yep, they've gotten to the point of guilting little kids out of their ice cream money.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
Now, see, if they would have taken that video where the mom was guilting the kid to not play with the evil toy and sell it.
Warrior Wizard.
Yes, yes. Sell Orlock on eBay for some money to give to the Kingdom Hall. There you go. You let the worldly kid play with the evil wizard toy, you know. Wow. It's something else, I tell you. Well, I actually not this year, last summer, I had a couple of JWs come to the door. Some nice young ladies. They couldn't have been up much more than 20, if that. So I didn't, go full on atheist on them. I tried to rein it in a little bit, but I was amazed they had the Jehovah's Witness app on their phone, and was had propaganda videos loaded up on their phones. So I was like, oh, could you watch this 3-minute video with us? And I'm like, yeah, whatever.
Yeah. I think that's something, because when we were growing up, we were older at that point by the time the internet came out, but we were told, you don't go on the internet. That's something you stay away from.
That's the devil's playground right there.
That's the devil's playground.
Well, they've twisted the devil's playground around to use it for Jehovah, because they had the whole app on their phone, and they had they could pull up Bible verses here and there, and they had awake articles right in the phone and everything. I was like, wow.
That's about never to have an emblem or logo, because they do that as a form of idolatry. Now they have an official emblem and logo.
You see that JW.org square every place.
They put it on the sides of the Kingdom Halls now.
Yeah.
Funny how it works. Unbelievable.
I honestly think that one day the online content and the videos are going to replace their printed magazines. That they're not. They're going to. I think one day they're going to abandon being a publishing company altogether and just be a website and videos, and the Kingdom Halls will slowly turn into movie theaters.
Well, I have to wonder if there's enough witnesses left to actually cover the territories, because I noticed they're not doing the door-to-door stuff so much anymore, if at all. In some areas, they're just out with those little carts out on the sides of the streets, getting people as they walk by, or out in busy traffic areas. But it's getting less and less where they actually go from door to door, and I think it's because there's probably not enough of them left anymore to cover the territories effectively.
That could well be, because the girls that came to my door, there was actually another couple closer to my age, because the girls were on the porch with me for a good at least half an hour, and the other couple kept walking by and walking back and walking back, and after about half an hour, the girls were like, we have to go. They're watching. They want us to leave. And I was like, okay. I was enjoying the conversation. And then they said, well, can we come back? And I said, okay, look, you can come back, but I'm making it perfectly clear that this is a philosophical exercise for me, and I'm much more interested in teaching you some critical thinking. And they're like, oh. And but then I just about died laughing, because they said, oh, we love critical thinking. And I was like,
oh, dear.
I know when I've...
Who knows? You might have planted a seed there that'll sprout someday.
I mean, they said, wow, you're really nice for an atheist. I'm like, I know.
It's funny because I can totally put myself in their position. Because I would have been that guy. I would have been enjoying that conversation and being like, I want to talk to this person again. But I also know that the older couple in the car would have been saying, is this going to progress anywhere? Is she really going to, take any steps to change her life? And, convince them that it's a waste of time.
Yeah.
That's exactly what happened to me the last time I ran into Mormons downtown, because I was with an atheist friend, and they, I wasn't even going to engage them. We had just been talking about their big genealogy conglomerate and how ironic it was that it was religious people with that. But, I was like, I'm not going to be a bitch. We're on our way to get burgers. I'll leave the poor Mormon boys alone. But no, they accosted us, and I was like, "You picked the wrong people to mess with, fellas." And I'd been carrying a book about atheism. I forget which one it was, but I just kind of flashed the cover. Oh, you're atheist, and we're like, "Yep." And we talked for a minute about something, and then one of them says, "Oh, have you read the Book of Mormon?" And we, like, in unison, we're like, "Oh yeah!" And I was like, "Yeah, submarines in the 6th century with magic rock lights. That's pretty awesome." Okay. But the funny part is, and if our listeners should have an idea, because we've done a few Mormon shows, but they always have what they call the greenie missionary and the senior. And they always pair them up that way on purpose. So one guy will be, a year and a half in. The other guy will have just been there a few months. And so I start talking about, just because I've studied quite a bit of Mormonism, and I was like, oh, that Joseph Smith, did you know he was busted for fraud for telling people he could find treasure with a rock in a hat? And they were like, no, that never happened. I was like, dude, there's actual documents. You can go to the courthouse and look it up and see what he was charged with, that he was convicted, and he spent time in jail for exactly that. And the greedy was just like, really? Tell me more. And that's when The other one was like, oh, look at that. Well, you're very nice, atheists, but I really don't think we're going to change any minds today, so it's time to go. And when you said that, it was like, wow, that sounds a lot like my little missionary buddies.
Well, it's funny, like, going back to the numbers, so to speak. When I first moved, we actually have a Kingdom Hall just outside of town. Now, I live in central PA, north central PA. Basically, our county population is about 3,000, so it's a really small area. And at the time, I was still living in the house that I had, and every Saturday at 9 o'clock, they would fucking show up at my door. Now, I worked second and third shift, so 9 o'clock in the morning, I was just going to bed or falling asleep or an hour into it. So it got really annoying, but a couple times I dialogued with them, and I think after a while, I mean, this kept going on for months, and I got sick of it, but I think I actually became a pet project of this one person. And it got so bad that they actually started coming earlier, like at 8, and I'm like,
oh no.
Nah. And then they started coming during the week, and anytime I saw them on the street, I mean, pretty much everybody knows everybody in this town, or they think they do. So finally, they came to my house one Saturday, and I had a lousy night at work, so I was like really pissed off, and I actually called the police on them and filed a restraining order. So I don't see any of them at all. I don't even see them around town anymore.
Yeah,
which is bizarre.
I wish the Mormons would come back, because I know their secret handshakes, and I want to like give them the sure sign of the nail when they come to the door. I'd be like, did I get it right?
Yeah.
Freaking the hell
I love to look into other religions. Now that I've left the witnesses, I think it's fascinating. I've looked into the Mormons, I've looked at Scientology, all kinds of different things. It's just fascinating.
It really, really is. I wish we found each other at ReasonCon, man.
Well, maybe.
I think we're planning on going to Reason Rally. They're not having
Reason rallies this year. There's not going to be a ReasonCon this year because of Reason Rally, so
you're gonna have to come that way, and we can like hook up.
That would be awesome.
Yeah. Definitely. Bill, you'll have to come.
Yeah.
Well, I know my local group is talking about maybe trying to organize a bus or something to go down. Hubby and I motorcycles, so we're probably just going to take Mike on a trip down, because we're all through. We were actually as far as Asheville this June. We came back. I don't know if you know Jim Dobler, but we went on a trip with Jim and some friends of his on the bikes. We started in Virginia. We went all the way down through Asheville, and then we shot down to Savannah for a night, because of course you have to go see Bobby and Ashley. And unfortunately, I haven't heard back from Ashley, so I'm thinking the kid thing just completely got the best of her.
Sounds like. Oh well, we'll have to catch up with her another time.
I know. Well, again, thank you guys, all of you, for joining us.
Yeah.
Very informative. Ashley's going to be mad because she really wanted to learn. But,
yeah, she loves learning about new stuff like this.
Absolutely.
Well, thanks for having us on.
Oh, you're very, very welcome. So, do you guys have any blogs or anything that you do that you want to talk about, or where can people find you?
I think you're our second blog. The first blog was with
our
podcast. Sorry.
Okay.
The second podcast we've been on. Our first one was with Bobby and Miss Ashley. So we don't really do a whole lot as far as blogging. We do some stuff.
You need to start.
Yeah, I do need to start. I know. I got to get my butt in gear.
And you too, Phil.
Yeah, one of these days.
So I know, like, you, Shelli, you're on Facebook, and I assume you are, Steve. I don't know. I've got Shelli on there, so.
Yeah, just look him up off my Facebook, Stephen Frantz.
Frantz. All right, so Shelli and Stephen Frantz. You want to check them out on Facebook. They're in North Carolina, which has I told Foda, I said I liked it in Hickory, but we did the Blue Ridge Parkway, and I'm like, I love your state. It's
beautiful.
Yeah, the Parkway on a bike. Whoo, I tell you. Yeah. Yeah, we did Biltmore too, of course.
Oh, nice. I haven't been to Biltmore yet. That's one of the ones I need to do still.
Go, you know what? Talk to Jim because he has a season's pass and he's your own tour guide.
Ooh, awesome.
He knows more about the people, about the place and the people that work there, I think.
Cool. Well, I'll have to ask him.
You should. If you're gonna go hang out with Jim. He loves to go back and talk about it. So you would totally do that. So definitely do that. So Phil, do you have any, like, are you just on Facebook or anything you wanna?
Nah, I don't have anything to promote or anything. Maybe I'll do something later.
All right. Well, when you do, well, we'll have you back and you can plug it then. How's that?
That sounds like a plan.
All right. Well, thank you very much for your time, and hopefully we'll catch up with you at the next Unbelievable brunch if you have time. That'd be awesome. We always have a good time down there. We ended up turning it into supper afterward. That always well, Greg and I come from Kitchener, so for those of you who aren't familiar with Canadian geography, I'm about an hour away from Phil, and so it's when my friend Greg and I go to these brunches, we end up making it a day because, well, we drove an hour, we may as well hang out with people, so I did that. So, all right, Beth, where can we find you?
Easiest way is on Twitter, Dune9998. That connects to my blog, as well as to Facebook. And my blog is Havoc and Chaos. And type it in, you should be able to find it. But the links are on both Facebook and Twitter. And on Facebook, it's Beth A. Hambridge. Don't use the one without the A. I didn't end up deleting it. I ended up reactivating it. So that's the easiest way to find me.
Awesome. And Miss Ashley couldn't make it in, but you know, noreligionrequired.com. You can find them in the Secular Media Group as well. They've got a Facebook page, No Religion Required. They've got the No Religion Required After Show chat room at Miss Ashley _NRR. I think that's how it goes. If I got that wrong, I'm sorry. She's also got her Miss Ashley page on Facebook. You can find her there as well. And we have also the Atheist Apocalypse. We launched another episode today as episode 9, so there's one more for this season before we take a break over the holidays. So check us out. Things are getting really interesting, and we're building up to maybe telling people why half the population of the world vanished. You never know. But yeah, so on YouTube and our main area, of course, atheistapocalypse.com, where we are on iTunes and I think we're Spreaker, Stitcher, all those places. You can find us there. It's lots of fun. And we just did an interview on Friday night with the Utah Outcasts. So check those guys out too. We had a lot of fun. Learned a lot about cheese and I'm a cheese lover, but that Miss Felicia, man, she knows cheese like you wouldn't believe. So check those guys out too. They just put up the Atheist Apocalypse episode today, and that's UtahOutcasts.com. So other than that, I think that's it for now. So I will bring us out, as always, with our friend Foda's Humanist Creed. And if folks could mute while we do that, that'd be great.
I know the truth and power of reason and of rational thinking, and I will use them to my advantage. I know the truth and power of educating myself and of expanding my intellectual boundaries, and I will educate myself. I know the truth and power of vanquishing ignorance, and I will do so whenever the opportunity presents itself. I know the truth and power of morality without supervision, and of true and accurate righteousness. I know the truth and power of obliterating tyranny, be it intellectual, emotional, or philosophical, and will work toward that goal whenever and however possible. I know the truth and power of human ingenuity. I know the truth and power of human compassion, and I will be mindful of the welfare of others. I know the truth and power of equality and fairness for all living things. I know the truth and power of the importance of our families, our friends, and our fellow men and women. I know the truth and power of human stewardship of our lands, our waters, and our skies, and I will try to act to preserve our environment. I know the truth and power of the sciences of mathematics, of physics, and of chemistry, and of the important role of these disciplines in understanding the workings of this cosmos. I know the truth and power of the rejection of all notions or beliefs that reside in the supernatural or the superstitious, and of those notions or beliefs that we are not supposed to be able to explain. And I know that these rejections are necessary for humankind's survival. I am a human being with a free mind, liberated from irrational influence and from unreasonable dogma.